Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Man Gets His Car Crushed by Not Paying His Repair Bill. Not my story, but my father's. Took place in the early 2000s. He's a master mechanic who can literally work on any car, foreign or domestic. He's teaching me right now, and it's an honor to learn from him. He's always run his own independent repair shop almost as long as I can remember. And he told me this story recently that just seems perfect for this sub. So this guy comes in with a pretty nice Chrysler convertible to get his transmission fixed. He had to remove the transmission, disassemble, and rebuild it. Pretty long process, but it's no problem. After a day's work, he calls the customer up, says his car is ready, and reminds him of the agreed upon price of about $1,200. The guy said he could only pay $600 then, and he'd have to get back to him on the rest. Now, this isn't out of the ordinary. Where we live, most people aren't exactly wealthy. And my dad's a nice guy. He single-handedly supported 4 kids and a wife, so we weren't exactly rich. It's not uncommon for people to pay in installments. He doesn't charge interest or fees or anything. Just tries to do what's right. The guy pays half his bill, and with the promise of paying the remaining amount in a few weeks, he leaves with his car. About 2 months pass, however, and the guy hasn't paid. Hadn't even contacted my dad about any issues or to say something like he lost his job or something. So my dad calls him up and asks when he thinks he'll be able to pay the rest of his bill, and I kid you not. This is how the convo went. Dad, hey, this is XXX, I was wondering when you'll be able to pay the rest of your bill? Guy, oh. Yeah. About that, I'm not paying it. Dad, surprised, what? Is something wrong with the car? If something went wrong, I'll take care of it. Guy, no. The car runs great. I'm just not gonna pay you. Dad. What? Why? Guy, well, I have the car now, so I don't see any reason to pay you. They went back and forth a bit before my dad realized it was pointless and decided to enact some sweet revenge. He calls up a local towing company and gives them the guy's address, license plate, and care description and tells them to tow the vehicle to the county recycling center. He then calls up the recycling center and say, hey, you're gonna be getting a Chrysler convertible license plate XXX from XXX Towing. When it gets there, I want you guys to crush and recycle it. And so, they do. Car was crushed and recycled. The next day, the guy shows up to my dad's business furious and with the state patrol. My dad explains the entire story, and the cops tell the guy that technically, the vehicle was moved, not stolen. The recycling center received recyclable goods, and not stolen property, and now the car no longer exists, as it's been recycled, and thus was not a criminal manner, but a civil one. So the guy sues my dad, and once again, my dad explains the entire story, and amazingly, the judge says the same thing as the troopers and dismissed. It sounds almost unbelievable, because it just seems so illegal, but if a judge rules in his favor, it's gotta have some merit by a technicality or something. Granted, this was maybe 15 years ago, so the laws could have changed since. But goddamn. The guy gets his car crushed simply because he chose not to pay the remaining repair bill and wanted to take advantage of someone's kindness. The next one is titled, Mother Gets Fired, I Get Mice to Shut Down the Business. My mother worked for a hotel chain in which usually has a chain of restaurants right next to them, so they were all under an umbrella company. My mother worked in the hotel and my sister worked in the restaurant next door. My sister ended up dating her boss, the manager of the restaurant, for a while until he started cheating on her. We found this out as my mother, as the head of the hotel, monitored the CCTV in the hotel and the restaurant and saw other workers going up to his apartment above the hotel that he lived in regularly and the worker not coming out until the morning after. My mother broke it to my sister, who immediately resigned and worked elsewhere. But the manager ended up finding out that it was my mother who had told her daughter about him cheating, so he resented her for it. During that time the hotel and restaurant split, and my mother was made redundant, but was offered an immediate start in the restaurant next door as an assistant manager. Good pay rise, working with familiar people, and the agreement that the manager who cheated on my sister would have to be on separate shifts so there is no conflict of interest. She accepted the job. The manager ended up making my mother's life hell in subtle ways, by always putting her on 12-hour shifts, not paying overtime on time, etc. My mother is a hard worker, so she never complained and got the work done. The manager didn't like this as most of the workers would supplement her workload and helped her out when it was needed. The manager decided to bring out the big guns and ended up plotting for my mother to get fired. He put my mother on the night shift and she proceeded to go through the normal processes of emptying the tills and putting everything in the safe behind the kitchen, which only the assistant manager, my mother, and the manager had access to based on company policies. My mother went through her night shift and put everything in the safe as usual, locked it and went home. She gets a call the next morning requesting her to come in on her day off. She was accused of leaving the safe door open, which by policy, is gross misconduct. But there was no money missing. The company investigated this but the CCTV only covered the hallway leading up to the safe room and caught a figure wearing a black hoodie and go into the safe room. It then became a police matter who couldn't confirm nor deny that it was the manager who lived in the apartment upstairs, as the CCTV was apparently down on that night overlooking his apartment entrance. All of this blew over and my mother got a final warning and the manager was ordered to manage a different restaurant in another city. He moved out and another manager came in. The new manager loved my mother, re-employed my sister and it was smooth for a few years. Until the previous manager got transferred back. Obviously, my mother was anxious that something would happen again, and the same subtle torture came back, 12-hour shifts etc. As my mother predicted, she was called up another morning asking her to in on her day off and they had HR waiting there for her. They accused her of stealing from the tills. On the night in question, she was manager of the night, but the CCTV recording had been deleted in some bizarre data loss event. She got fired for gross misconduct. The house was nearly repossessed and I as the youngest sometimes had to go to school without a meal. As I've gotten older, I understood what this manager did and obviously I'd want to rip his head off. My partner ended up getting a job at the hotel next to the restaurant and she told me about the smoking area and that it mixes with the restaurant. She said that they had a big problem with mice in the kitchen. I saw the chance for my mother's redemption and I reported it to the council. The hotel my partner worked at got shut down for 2 weeks while an exterminator came in, but as it was the restaurant's responsibility as they owned the land, they faced huge fines and ended up putting that restaurant into negative profit. And it looks like the restaurant chain decided to shut the building down as the local residents stopped eating there. The building is currently up for sale. The hotel's customers are still a bit disappointed that there isn't a restaurant close by, but my partner still has the job. My mother is working as a manager of a different hotel for a different hotel chain. I never told my mother what I did, I just know she was happy when she heard the manager that did all this to her got fired for gross misconduct for not reporting the mice. The next one is titled, Fired. Are you sure? Okay. This story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. This happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers, and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately cancelled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business signed by his former manager and the IT policy available and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held. Patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious, but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business, now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages: 3 months pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an asshole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations, and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big grin and, "What are you going to do? Fire me?" after that. The next one is entitled Karen uses racism to try to get her way. Sweet revenge entails. I work as technical advisor on the phone for a massive international entertainment service provider that provides TV, internet as well as mobile phone services to over 13 million people in my country alone. The other day I had been working some overtime on a Sunday. This is important later. My last call of the day came through and it was from a textbook EK. The conversation was one of the most uncomfortable and distressing ones I've had at the company to date. For context, as a tech advisor I primarily deal with tech issues with TV and internet, however I also deal with billing. Here's how the conversation went. Op: "Hi, you're through to Op at the tech team, how may I help?" EK: "Finally, I have been waiting over an hour to get through." She hadn't. The hold time clock on my screen had said 13 minutes on hold. Op: "I do apologize for the wait. Let's get you sorted as quick as we can." EK proceeded to tell me that she normally pays her bill via direct debit and that this month our company had not taken it, and proceeded to cut her TV services off, which has made her life difficult with 4 kids under lockdown, and that her bill had also increased. Now for context again. My company always bills a month in advance, i.e. your October bill pays for the November services, etc. I had a look at her bill and she was correct that we had cut her services off. However, what she failed to know was that we had attempted to take payment twice and both had failed, so we had stopped, and what she had also failed to tell me was that her services had been cut off for 2 weeks now, as she had not paid for these services, remember, month in advance. I explained this to her and also explained that the increased bill was because she had a bill coming up and last month's bill was not paid. They would be put together. This meant the bill was almost £100. I explained to EK that we could reinstate her services but that a payment had to be made. EK: "I don't have any money in my bank right now, so I can't make the payment." Op: "Sorry ma'am, I cannot reinstate your services without a payment. It's procedure." EK: "That's rubbish. I have been cut off before and you have reinstated me without a payment." I had a look at her payment history and she had indeed been reinstated before, but this was a goodwill gesture authorized by a manager, and it is common knowledge and also told to the customer at the time that this was a one-time thing. I explained to EK all of this and she became aggressive, telling me I was useless and that she wanted to speak to a manager. I knew only one manager was in at the time and I knew that the manager would say no. But EK was being pushy, so I placed her on hold and spoke to a colleague who agreed with me. When I went back to EK I told her we wouldn't be reinstating her without a payment. EK made the argument that she didn't have any money in her bank and it was a Sunday so she couldn't go and put money in. I again apologized and empathized that it must be difficult with the 4 kids and no TV, however we can't give her a service she has not paid for. There was a lot of back and forth at this point, with EK being very aggressive and disgusting toward me and the company I work for. It was at this stage that EK showed her true colors upon me, saying that I could not reinstate. EK proceeded to make a comment that would haunt me till the day I die. Again, context for this. I am a minority in my country, however not one that is the target of this comment, but it still affected me deeply. EK, you clearly don't want to help me. I bet if I was AN, you would switch me back on. I bet you always switch N back on when they ask. I proceeded to end the call immediately as I felt my rage had peaked and I was worried my professionalism would stop. The EK's account has been sent to our customer priority team and they are looking at cancelling the account altogether with no ability to reinstate in the future. The last one is titled, Coworker Lunch Thief Eats Dog Biscuits. Okay, in the late 70s I was a teacher. I also had an elderly diabetic dog. I needed to buy biscuits that needed to be refrigerated in order to give the dog her medicine. But at the school that I worked at there was this one guy that we'll call Lunch Thief. He was a classic, I'll do what I want, without any regard for the feelings of anyone else. This guy also ate a few of my lunches as well. Because of that, I bought a small fridge that I kept by my desk. I and my other co-workers were devising a plan to get him back or fired. We even had a meeting about it. So Monday I went to the pet care store and got the dog biscuits. Because it was early in the morning I opted to just go straight to work rather than going back to my house. I put the dog biscuits in the work fridge. When I went to get water from the jug during lunch I noticed that they were missing. He came into the break room and said, "Your cookies were bad, they gave me this shits, and they had no flavor. I think that they expired." I told him that they were dog biscuits and that he was an idiot for not reading that label on the bag. This guy was laughed at and picked on for the rest of the year. Comments were thrown his way about being a dog and getting the shits from the biscuits. He resigned from the next school year due to the embarrassment. The revenge was accidental but very lovely. Thanks for listening.